We got Jason Leydon on the podcast. Jason is the owner of CrossFit Milford and recently formally branded his competitive athlete coaching along with Angelo Cisco as Conquer Athlete. And Jason is a continuing education junkie, which we get into a little bit in this podcast. And so we met at some of those varied continuing education courses that fitness coaches end up at. And we have a pretty good conversation here just about identity as an athlete, especially given Jason's background with basketball and having that suddenly taken away based upon a kind of a freak accident, as well as the continuing education stuff that he dug into when he got really serious about coaching. And then not just going to a bunch of courses and reading books, but actually being able to apply that to athletes. And then by extension, teach that to his coaches at CrossFit Milford. And then we get a little bit in the weeds with some coaching stuff at the end surrounding energy systems and some of those geekier details that I enjoy. But great conversation with Jason. Really looking forward to you having a nice listen. Enjoy. So something I've always wondered about is your accent. Is that a Milford? Is that a typical Milford accent? What's the deal?
I think so. I was born and raised in Milford.
Okay.
You know, and you're not the first one to say that I have an accent. And it was worse before I became quote unquote professional, meaning when I was playing basketball and...
Well, yeah, if you're going to trash talk, you have to just kind of like bust out whatever regional dialect so they don't even know what you're talking about.
Exactly. And I would say whatever. And I don't know. I guess I got an accent because my wife makes fun of me all the time. Like everyone kind of says something about my accent. I'm like, I was born and raised in the suburbs of Milford, so I don't really know where my accent came from.
It's interesting as someone who enjoys paying attention to accents. Like it's not an obvious New York accent, but it kind of sounds like it, and it's just a little bit different.
Yeah, it's sort of like I'm on the border of New York. It's like, who is this kid?
Yeah, exactly. My dad grew up in Jersey and had a pretty thick Jersey accent, and he was in sales and was living in Chicago, and got some feedback that his super thick Jersey accent was off-putting to these Midwestern people, where they're like, what's this East Coast hustler trying to get me to do?
Dude, I totally understand that. Like so I went to college for exercise sciences and phys ed and health. And when I got done playing basketball, somehow I got in the financial industry because my basketball career ended like without me wanting it to end. I could get into that story too, which is a crazy story. Have you ever heard that story?
I have heard that. We can tell that too.
So I met my now wife, and she was doing work at this financial industry. And she's like, oh, they're always hiring. Like, why don't you get a job here? Because at that point, you know, there was no like CrossFit gyms. I was like, all right, I'll get a job there. And I was just so like this little white ghetto kid, wannabe ghetto kid playing basketball, like showing up to financial meetings with this weird dialect and these baggy pants. I was like, what am I doing? I got to change something. So, yeah.
I need to get into fitness.
I need to just take this into fitness, yeah. This is just not working.
People there will let me have tattoos and an accent and not judge
I'll be okay.
me.
Yeah, I'll be all right.
Yeah, that's excellent. You mentioned the end of your basketball career, which is probably actually a story worth telling. I think you told me this when we first met at one of the CCP courses potentially.
So you want me to get into it?
Let's hear it.
I love the pauses.
Yeah.
So my goal was always to try to get overseas to play basketball. And for when I got done in college, I was gunning for my green card because it's a lot easier if you can get like residency. And I was trying to go for Irish residency because that would declassify me as an American. And I don't know if the rules have changed, but you know, every team can only have 2 Americans on a team, right? So the amount of people that are trying to gun for it overseas, it's like a bloodbath. You know, it's really hard. And so that's what I was kind of shooting for. I couldn't get it, but I did end up at a couple of agency tryouts. And like the first one I went to was in Salt Lake City, and I never had exposure to altitude. And that just like absolutely crushed me. And then I went to one in Boston where I was fortunate enough to get picked up. And then we went overseas, and I was in Holland for a little bit. And I came back, and my next move was I was going to work for this guy and try to get to Norway. and tryouts are on like a Monday. And this is Friday, and I recently like just got back from Holland. I had a couple months home, and I was kind of like working my butt off. And I was mowing my parents' lawn, and as I was mowing the lawn, I like took a step back to get like the last strip of the lawn, and I stepped on the central air unit outside, right? You know, like those big blocked ones. And I thought that it was really close to me. So I was like, all right, like, so as I'm falling, I'm like, I'm just going to sit down on the central air unit and then whatever, I'm going to stand up and finish this stupid lawn I got to mow and go shoot some free throws. And then as I go to sit, I'm like, oh shit, it's not behind me. And then I just fell. And as I fell, like my hands like gripped the lawnmower and I just pulled it back. So my foot came under the blade and the blades went like pop, pop. And and then it's like shock, right? So I like pushed the lawnmower and I wouldn't look down because I was like, in my head, I'm like, my foot just went underneath this lawnmower. Like, but I'm like, all right, maybe it didn't happen, right? Maybe like I hit my foot, but somehow like I didn't hit it. And right now it's just like complete shock, so I don't really feel anything. And I'm like, oh fuck, I gotta look down. So I look down and my shoe is split open and my toes are just like hanging out of my fucking shoe. Just dangling, right? And now I'm like, oh my God. So I just start ripping as loud as I can because it was midday, and on a Friday, so it was at work. So finally I come to my senses. And thank God the adrenaline's like still there, right? And I'm like, I gotta figure something out. So I take my shirt off, I tie it around my foot, I lock it in, and I hop into the house on one foot. I dialed 911, and they're like, whatever, 911, how can we help you? I was like, I just put my foot on the lawnmower. I'm about to go into shock. Here's my address. Please get here quick. And it sucked because where I used to live was like on all these hills and in these back roads. So it's super hard for like a big truck to get there, So I lay down on the ground, I put my foot up, and at that point, like the pain's soaking in, right? And I'm like, holy fuck, like this is bad. So painful. So then I'm just fucking calling anybody to try to get someone next to me. And I'm like, I call my parents. So my dad's like ripping the truck home. I call my friends. And one of my buddies came over who has since passed away. And so I'm laying there, my foot all chopped up. And then the ambulance comes. And, they can only give you so much morphine, right? So I get an ambulance. And I'm like, guys, I need something. Like this morphine. I need something inside my body right now. And they can only give me so much, which pretty much did nothing. So I finally get to Yale New Haven Hospital, which is like the busiest hospital in the world. And it's like packed, right? So I can't even get in a room because people are like dying. So I'm on this stretcher outside in the hallway with my toes hanging off. And I like, that's how like serious that this hospital is. So they just start shooting me up with drugs to numb the pain. And my mom's there. And as they take the bandage off, the front of my foot looks fine because it hit me in the bottom. And then my mom like walks around to the backside and looks at my foot and like her face turns white. And I'm like, oh fuck. I'm like, this isn't good, right? So I finally get in the room and the doctor's being like, all right, well, can you feel this? Can you feel this? And I'm like, yeah, of course I can feel it. And he's like, well, I didn't do anything yet. I'm like, oh, fuck me. So I couldn't feel a thing.
Fooled you.
Yeah. So I was in the hospital for 4 weeks because they thought they were going to have to amputate because it cut it straight down to the joint and to the bone. So the bone was just sticking out. And it was so exposed to the air and then the rust of the blade and the grass and the dirt that it was just completely infected. So like every morning I'd wake up and they would stick my foot in a puddle, in a bleach bucket. I couldn't be on medicine for this because of the blood flow. So they'd stick my foot in a bucket of bleach and then they'd have to go in there with tweezers and pull out any like dirt and grass particles. Bro, this is like, if there's a hell or if there's like something like to me, like that's it. It's just like you're in a torture. Like I can't even imagine people being tortured because that to me, I'm like, my God, like just a tweezer going into my fucking foot and pulling out dirt, and I'm just sitting there, like passing out and coming back, and it was just so bad. So I was there for like 4 weeks, and then I got home, and then I was bedridden for another like 2 months because they had to put this device on it. It was like a mechanical leech to pull the blood down to it to try to get the because they didn't want to do a skin graft, so to put the blood down to kind of get that, and it did. And at that point,
so leeches are still part of modern medicine then?
Yeah, they're just mechanical now, right? It's AI.
Yeah.
AI is even taking over animals. So at that point, that ended, and I called my agent. I was like, yeah, I'm done. You know, I just didn't want to have to kind of bust my tail again and get back to it. And so that was that. And I was like, wow, what the hell am I going to do now, right? So at that point, I was like, I don't know, I was like racing motorcycles. I was doing MMA. Like, it was just like, because my entire identity was basketball, right? So that just like ended out of my control. And I was like, I don't even know who the fuck I am anymore, you know? And I was just like all over the place. And then I met my wife.
Yeah, so you were Jason, the basketball player, basically.
That's how I viewed myself, right? Because that was like my whole entire life.
Yeah. So when did you start to realize that your basketball career might be ended by that injury? Was it as soon as it happened?
As soon as that happened, I was like, and like once I got to my senses, I was like, I'm not going to try to like get back, because like I got there, but I wasn't like, I was good enough to get there, but when I got there, I wasn't like killing it. You know what I'm saying? So to get back there would have been a ton of work and sacrifice. And at that point, I was like, I just got to move on. You know, like I did get there. I got my foot in the door. I proved myself I could do it. I was like, but now it's time to move on.
Yeah, you got your foot in the door, and then you got your foot in the lawnmower.
Yeah. Bada boom.
Yeah. So you essentially had to sort of just recalibrate who you were as a person, not just as an athlete, right? Which I mean, actually, within the sport of CrossFit, I think we see a lot of folks who identify as CrossFitters, and as coaches, that can be somewhat challenging to sort of get them to detach from their performance a little bit. So, what did that process look like for you?
It just had to run its course until I was able to find something else. And that's in like so many sports, right? If you do research on Olympians, like when they get done with the Olympics, like that's one of the highest like depression rates and or suicides. And Michael Phelps is talking about this on a podcast I just heard where he was on with Tony Robbins, because they get done and it's like, who am I? Like, I'm nothing now, when it's over. Mine wasn't that bad, because I wasn't at that level, and to me, like, wasn't like I put in a ton of hours, but not nearly what they did. But I just had to have it run its course for me, and then I reflect a lot, and I'm very intrinsic, so I'm very good at kind of like being my own therapist, kind of. And I got into the motorcycles, and I got into the MMA for a while, and at some point, like for me, it was like, so I was on a motorcycle. And I was with this group of guys, and we were just like ripping it on the highway. And I looked down, and I was going like $150, like on my Yamaha R1. And I was like, what the fuck am I doing? Like the slightest move, like I'm dead, And it wasn't worth it for me. So that was almost like the defining moment, because I can visualize that. And I just kind of slowed down. And I think like a couple weeks after that, I just sold the bike. I was already talking to my wife at that point. We were kind of dating for a while. And she's really she's very strong mentally and internally. So she just helped guide me, And then at some point, so I got into the financial industry to get my feet planted, because I didn't really want to go into like a major gym and just be a personal trainer. And then this small studio was closing down in Milford. And my wife and I were talking, and I was like, like this is obviously my passion. It's what I've always done, and it's what I went to school for. I was like, so we're not married yet. We don't have kids. She's like, why don't you just buy it and see what we can do with it, And so that's what I did. And I think allowing me to get back into something that I love, which was training and coaching, is something that kind of brought me back around. And then that's still how I identified myself for a while, right? And I think like what people do is that they just go from one thing to the next thing, which isn't healthy. So I did that, and I'm very much like an all or nothing thing, where I kind of go right into the rabbit hole of whatever I'm doing and what I want to be good at. And my wife was really there to kind of like play the strings with me, of allowing me a little bit of slack to like go deep and then kind of pull me back so I wouldn't ruin our relationship, and it's been like that for a while. And then as our marriage progressed, I wanted to continue our marriage, so I kind of kept working on our language and communication. And then once we got kids, that was kind of having the kids really kind of, I think, set me from a good counterbalance perspective of coaching, working, but also the unselfishness of being like a parent, and a husband. So that's something that kind of all grabbed me back. Yeah,
I got it. So with coaching, I mean, you're a continuing education junkie in some ways, right? Just like taking a lot of courses, reading a lot of stuff, learning from a lot of different disciplines. As an athlete, were you similar? Were you like a cerebral player who was, I mean, obviously dedicated to get to a high level, but some athletes do a lot of research and are always trying to apply different methods and learn different things. And some just spend a lot of time practicing and are just kind of good. Does one of those identify? Do you identify with one of those more than the other?
Yeah, I was more about the hard work. So I kind of got into, the whole jump soles route, and I did the jump soles for a while, and then that led me down the path.
Those are like the thing in the magazine, like the back of the magazine, where you're like
increase your vert by 15
you're
inches.
Up on your toes with these like big circles under your shoes.
Yeah, bro. So I would do that, and that led me down the path of like plyometrics, and then that led me down the path of like strength and conditioning for sport, which really wasn't big when I was there. It was mostly kind of like chest and tris and whatever. You had like a basketball background, and that kind of led me into research from there. And then it's pretty much like what I've always done was just hard work. I remember like being on vacation in high school, and I'd wake up and I'd like bring my jump soles with me and my ball and whatever it is, and I'd make my parents drive me to the park before we'd get the day started, so I can get at least 1 to 2 hours in of training, plyometric work, drill work, and then so that stayed with me in high school. Where in high school, I became really good friends with the janitor. Well, my dad was good friends with the janitor, and I would wake up and I'd get into the high school at like 5:30 a.m., shoot free throws and drill, work on movements, shower, then go to homeroom, make sure I got my grades good, and right after that, go right back into something else. So the selfishness of self-improvement and the drive was always there, and I think for me, because I wasn't really the most talented, the most athletic, so it's something that if I wanted to be good, that's what I had to do. And that just created a habit, that pattern for me and wherever I took that to, and I just kind of transferred that into being like the best coach that I could possibly become, or whatever it is.
Yeah. So once you started coaching and you're like, okay, cool, this is what I want to do, then that similar work ethic was applied. But in the case of coaching, you're not going to buy some weird shoes from a magazine to increase your vertical.
I might.
You might do it.
But it's really anything I do, because I remember like when I was in the financial industry, like I fucking hated it. I wanted to rip my eyes out every single day, but I would still like, I had to physically get there early. Like I had to do the cold calling. Like I made myself go back there Monday through Friday to make calls from like 5 to 9 p.m. Right now, at that point, I was still like 26, 27 years old. So it's something that is just kind of like innate inside of me, that no matter what I'm doing, like it's just there, and when it's around stuff that I really enjoy, that's when I can go down the rabbit hole.
Why did you hate the financial industry so much? I feel like a lot of people have that story. Yeah, I just hated it.
It just wasn't for me. I didn't like, I would make myself look at the S&P and all that stuff, and I would consult on trying to learn it, but I didn't get excited about it. Like I didn't go to bed. Like I was in that, and then every waking second, I would like be checking out different trainers. And this one Connecticut guy, this guy Ross Eminent, who's a huge like boxing trainer. This guy's a stud. Like I'd be calling him and talking to him about stuff he's doing, and I always knew like my truest passion was in training. It's something that always drove me. I mean, I'd still at that point, I was waking up at like 6 a.m. and I'd be running stairs and doing plyometric work. Even though I wasn't playing sports anymore, it's just something I had to do. And I'd always have to train. So I got the chance. So why'd I hate the financial industry? It just didn't vibe well for me, because some of the people that I worked with there, they loved it, and they were really good at it. And I was good at it just because of my work ethic, but I wasn't good at it because I really understood it. And I didn't want to understand it.
I think that's probably that's a really interesting point, right? You didn't want to understand. I think that everyone has something in their life like that. I mean, a lot of school was like that for me, where I could do okay and understand the stuff, but I had no desire to push beyond that.
Yeah.
Say, okay, cool, got it, ready to move on.
Right.
Whereas when there's something that you are interested in, then you're spending your own time and energy actively digging into it and being like, oh, well, this thing is kind of weird. I don't totally understand why this athlete can do this, but they can't do that. Or what does this coach have to say? And you're like actively seeking that stuff out as opposed to just kind of going through it.
Yeah, for sure. Like for me, it's like I'm always trying to read in at least 1 to 2 books a month or a month and a half. And then after that, I'll cycle through. I have to make sure I do a weekend seminar. So I have this as like formula that I go through between online courses, weekend seminars, and that. And then for me, it gets to the point where if I'm not like talking to another coach, then it's like that's something like I yearn for. I'm like, all right, fuck, who can I email out of the blue to try to talk to, right? And I remember I shot like Dan John an email, and he emailed me back right away, and I was like, oh, this is the coolest thing ever, right? But it's something that I have to do. My wife's always making fun of me for it, but it is what it is.
Yeah. Well, how do you actually apply that stuff as well? Because a lot of people will read articles or potentially go to a seminar and then nothing happens. Nothing changes with their coaching. Nothing changes with how they write programming. They maybe have some recollection of the stuff that they covered, but they just don't do anything with it. So it sounds like this is something that you actually are able to take back and apply. How does that work for you?
I don't know. I think like everybody I talk to and every seminar I go with the intent of needing to learn something about that I'm not familiar with. And then I don't know, like I don't want to sound like a dick, but I just get it. Like some people like going to like the FRC course or whatever it might be, or listening to like Louis talk, or hearing a new article from Juggernaut, or listening to James come out with some mixed modal, like whatever it might be. Like I hear, I'm like, oh yeah, like that makes total fucking sense, right? And then I'll spend some time to the application of it with who I think it fits for, if they need it, I think, and based off where they are. And if I don't quite get it, I have to get it. Meaning, then I'll just kind of reach back out to that person and try to learn more, or just review stuff until I do get it, and then I'll formulate my own methods on it, or apply that based off how they say it, But yeah, like if I'm gonna go learn something, I'm learning it for a reason, and from there, like I either agree with it and try to apply it, or if I don't agree with it, I think of a way that I can agree with it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. Right. It sounds like you're saying that you will be sort of processing the information and then immediately in your head trying to apply it to certain scenarios, right? That you already have an understanding of potential. Let's say an FRC course, for people who don't know, is focused on certain exercises and ways of approaching like joint motor control, which can be pretty applicable for a lot of mobility and stability issues, right? So say you're taking in that information and you're just immediately thinking, okay, where would I apply this in a program? What athletes would this potentially be useful for? Have I seen other systems offer something similar and I've had good success with it? Is that sort of like your thought process when you're
absolutely.
taking this stuff in?
And I think too, like the longer you get within inside the sport, the more you can peel away at the information, because if you go to like a weekend seminar, most weekend seminars, no matter who it is like a basic foundation, right? Unless it's like different levels. And there's a bunch of like baseline information of like the entry points and the beginner application of it. But I just think the longer you're in the sport or training, and the more you're exposed to, then the more you kind of peel away at the information said or articles you read on like one or two major nuggets. Like when you first get into learning and you're first understanding and hearing something, then it's kind of like this weekend or this 8 hours or 16 hours of this book of just information. You're like, all right, well, cool, that's awesome. But there's so much stuff that you kind of like shut down from it, and that's happened to me before. So when I do that, I just got to keep getting a better understanding of it so I can peel away for one or two major nuggets. And that's kind of what I always try to do, is like if I go to something, or whether it's a seminar or a book, like I try to get the max 3 major learning points for myself, because I feel like anything more than that is just too much, And if I can get 3 major things that I don't know, or a better understanding of the application of it, then I can look to implement it more if I agree with it.
It sounds like you're also saying that you have almost an understanding of what it feels like to take something away from one of those things. And that if you don't feel like you took something away, that then that's a project for you to keep learning, right? That it's like, okay, I don't feel like I get this because I know what it feels like to get something from something else. So how do I get there?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, so when I do my seminars, it's the same thing. Like I want to try to break my seminars down in a way that everybody can get something out of it. Because otherwise, it's like, who cares if you're the smartest guy in the world, but if no one understands what you're saying or what to get out of it, then it's a pointless seminar. And I remember being at one seminar and you might have been there with me. I'm not going to say the guy's name or what seminar it was, but he got up there to talk, and it was in Chicago. and we were talking. He's like, if you get 10% from this seminar, then that's good. And I was like, that's bullshit. Like, I just paid all this money. Like, I want at least 60%. Like 10%. Like, what the fuck am I gonna do with that? So I was like, I can never be like that at my seminars. Yeah, I can tell you offline what that was.
Yeah, I'm curious. I'm racking my brain. I'm like, I wonder which thing this was.
I'm pretty sure you were there too, because it was in Chicago. It was like 7 years ago. Yeah.
Great. We'll hide that one from the listeners.
Yeah.
We'll connect on that one separately. So in terms of thinking about learning in the context of coaching a sport, how much do you, I guess my question has to do with applying things in real life, and this theoretical information, right? So how do you balance the practical application and seeing if stuff works, and then going and seeking out the more theoretical stuff we were just talking about?
It's a good question. You want to be tricky because you don't want to learn something and then just throw it in right away, which I've done too, because you don't really understand it or the context or the who's and the what's and the when's, right? So what I always try to do is, if I learn something, is get it, grasp it, understand it. I've kind of think about the application of it and who it could apply for, because there's always the principles, right? And if you stick to just the core principles and the hierarchy of needs, then you can be super, super successful, right? And if you talk about basic strength training, if you just think about hypertrophy and the strength and the power, test, regroup based around where you want to go, right? And the same thing with, if you think about conditioning, you have to just build a solid aerobic foundation. From there, you can increase into lactate shuttle, into more lactic power work, et cetera, right? So you have the principles. But then I think there's always little nuggets around peeling those principles a little bit more and making it more specific around people's fatigue factors. And that's what it really comes into, where you want to get something, know about it, be like, all right, I got this athlete, and this is based on the sport. This is where I see a fatigue factor setting in that can offset them based on performance. So based on what I know from this and based off the principles, how can I apply something that can maybe affect him a little bit better from a stimulus standpoint to create some sort of adaptation? And I might be rambling right now, but what I try to do is think of that first. And then with anything for a stimulus, you have to give it time, right? And tweak it from here and there, and it's almost like being reactive, unfortunately, where you might apply it for a cycle, maybe 5 or 6 weeks. And if you do think it's going to work and it doesn't quite work, then you might have to stick with it, or you might not be doing enough for it, or you might be doing too much for it. So you have to understand the athlete and where you kind of adjust from there and keep making those tweaks until it works. I think I could completely rambled. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no. I was tracking. Well, I think that one of the things that's tough about applying principles to something like coaching, sort of like you mentioned, is that the actual outcomes are very messy, right? That you can get some wonderful strength training principles and apply it and have an athlete not get results from it. And similarly, you could do something that is totally away from strength training and focus entirely on conditioning with an athlete for a while, and then they randomly jump in on someone else's workout and set a snatch PR. And you're like, well, I don't know.
Right.
So it can be hard to figure out what feedback is valuable and apply that versus what is just kind of the noise and chaos of human beings training.
Correct.
So how do you try to figure out what is real and what is just mess?
From an informational standpoint?
No, in terms of the actual results that people are getting.
If they're consistent. Right. If someone were to come in, stress is an amazing thing, right? I mean, see people pick cars up off people from a stress. We could see people hit crazy PRs and things they've never done before. So understanding the situation at the time, someone comes in and let's say understanding the athlete, understanding the athlete's training age, understanding the essence of the athlete, understanding their lifestyle, understanding what's really going on with them, understanding where they are inside their cycle, and understanding the situation. And if you can have a grasp of that, which is, in my opinion, truly coaching, then you can kind of factor through I don't want to say bullshit, but the surprise pop-ups versus real actual kind of work. And if something happens, you can kind of see that and be like, all right, that's probably a result of this, which is cool. Or you'd be like, all right, I mean, time situation, they're feeling it, they're riding the lightning. It's probably not going to happen again. We got to kind of make proper adjustments or pull the reins in a little bit, So I think to answer your question, if I am answering correctly, the better understanding you have of your athletes that you work with, that you retain through constant communication and understanding, then the better you can filter through that stuff.
Yeah, that you're able to think of things in sort of sets of athletes, right? Like these are the athletes who tend to be more enduring as opposed to powerful. And over this set, maybe we had some variable results trying different things, but consistently this tended to be what worked well for them and what didn't work well for them. And,
right.
and you can kind of wash out some of the just general noise by thinking in terms of larger groups of people.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's really interesting because it can be so difficult to figure out what's actually working or not because there's so many variables. And then also, you have not just the training that someone did recently, but the training they did for 6 to 12 months beforehand.
Exactly. And really understanding that, and really seeing the adaptation levels with that.
Right on. So at CrossFit Milford, you guys have an affiliate that's been, when did you actually affiliate?
2008, I want to say.
Yeah, so that's a long time.
Yeah.
That's a lot of years of CrossFit. And you guys have coaching staff, members doing the thing in addition to the actual coaching of competitive athletes. Something I'm curious about is the way that you actually teach coaches in your affiliate, right? Because we just talked about it. It's one thing to go to seminars and read books, and some people are motivated to do that and can take and apply that information, but that isn't necessarily the best way for most people to actually learn and apply stuff. So how do you think about taking the knowledge that you have from your own research, as well as your experiences coaching at high levels in the sport of CrossFit, to teaching your coaches at your facility who are just coaching, everyday people looking to look good, have fun, and get a little sweaty?
Yeah, I think it's something I talk with so we have a pretty extensive internship process, where a lot of it is about like movement and understanding movement, but also equally important about like people and understanding people. And as the coaches go through this internship process, they really have to understand how to walk the line between that, because communication is key, classroom management is key, the environment is key, and making sure people move healthy are keys, right? It's all like this huge pie chart. And one, I don't think has more importance than other based off my philosophy. Someone might completely disagree with me, and that's fine. But for me, it's like as people come in here for general physical preparedness, they want to sweat, they want to have fun, they want to feel better when they leave, and they want to continually progress. And if I can do that in an environment where they feel safe, where they feel respected, and where they feel kind of welcomed, then they're going to keep coming back. And for that matter, they're going to kind of bring more people in. Now, everything from there stems from the top, which is me. So we're pretty unique here, where we do have a pretty extensive competitor base here, and we do have a competitive gym, but we also have a very extensive GPP base here, and one doesn't weigh more than the other. And the way I coach competitors is completely different than the way I coach GPP. And the way I coach competitors, I don't teach our GPP coaches to coach like that, because for them, they have to create the experience. They have to create this environment where people want to come back, where they feel safe, where you know their name, where there might be a little bit of hand-holding in our facility, and I'm okay with that, where people, you're going to smile, you're going to understand how to communicate with them, whether you need to show them, whether they need to feel it, or whether they need to hear it. They understand the three different ways to teach, but they also have a grasp of language, and they understand that there's different archetypes of individuals. And with those different archetypes, you have to understand how you can talk to somebody, how you can say things to people, right? Because that is different. And for me, I don't want to push away somebody just because somebody doesn't know how to understand a language or there's a communication barrier, right? So that's a huge process of what we do here. And that's just time and exposure and education. And then alongside with that, it's also movement, because obviously they need to know how to coach movement, they need to know how to spot faults, and they need to know how to correct those faults. So that's the kind of like the demand that I put on our coaches, and through that I do a lot for that. I think I do. I don't really know what other people do, but I'll have a weekly meeting every single week with the staff. And inside the staff, that talks a lot about what we're going to call lead measures. So you have lag measures and you have lead measures, right? And lag measures are more like, all right, well, how much money did the gym take in last month, or who joined, who canceled? Meaning there's nothing you can do about that now, right? So I don't think it does any good to focus on that. But what we can do is focus on the lead measures. The lead measures, and this is from a book, The 4 Disciplines of Execution, the lead measures are what can affect that in the future, right? So it's like our front desk person. Every time someone comes in and leaves, they have to say the name, they have to smile. She has to have a small conversation with her, right? We have to go through members, and each coach has 1 or 2 major points to focus on for the week that develop into our main priority, which is member experience, right? And then we talk about that, we hold each other accountable. And then I also have individual meetings with the staff, and on those individual meetings, I'll go through things I think they need for the next development. So if someone's a newer coach, that individual meeting every single week is going to work on movement, errors, cueing, correctives, voice projection, eyesight, whatever I think it may be. If someone's more experienced, that individual meeting is going to tap into more of programming, maybe some more in-depth cueing, maybe some more in-depth error correcting, things of that nature. Communication and sales, like all things that we're going to talk about. So that's kind of like the stuff that we do for our staff in here. And like I said, that's completely different than our competitive side. Like our competitive side is way different, because that's like, I don't give a fuck about your feelings half the time, right? It's like, if you're doing this to do it for sport and you want to be elite, well, you better train hard. You better have that quote unquote Mamba mentality, like Kobe Bryant, and we have to attack it every single day and do the little things. If you don't do it, then you're not upholding your end, and that's it. It's over, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, so with coaches, you mentioned that they will have priorities that they're working on. How do you decide what those are, and can you give an example of some theoretical priorities for someone, or even real priorities?
Yeah, for sure. So we have a newer coach in here who really has to work on communication. When I say communication, I don't just mean talking. I mean, eyesight, handshaking ability, voice projection, body language, So in our meetings with her, I'll put her in different scenarios where that's the main focus, and then we'll cue it and correct it, and we'll get her just to understand it. Because I think it's just like anything else, it's habit forming, and they have to be aware of what they're doing, when they're doing it, so they can kind of fix it, right? And you have to educate them and teach them on that. Another coach in here who is a little bit more experienced, he's been coaching for a while, he's an older gentleman, he wants to get into programming. So some of our meetings with him, I'll go through programs with him, and periodization and strength protocols and understanding stress and stimulus and general stress response, and all those other things, right? So those are kind of like 2 variations.
Yeah, if we think about, let's use the coach working on communication as an example. Is that something where you're role playing? It's like, okay, literally say this to me as if I were a client. Is it observing her in action? What do you actually do?
So right now it's both, but right now it's role playing. So like yesterday was our meeting, and I need her to understand how to project better, right? So I put the volume up on the radio at a certain level. It was just me and her in a room. I stood like 50 feet away from her, and she had to coach me on a deadlift, and instruct me on what to do, just to get her to learn to project clearer, more precisely, and louder. So kind of like different things like that, on what I think might work or might not work. And I might go through it and be like, wow, well, that didn't fucking work. So let's go back and try something else next week, right? So yeah, things like that.
So you're almost just making up drills the same way you would for an athlete trying to improve a movement or something.
Yeah, exactly. But I do kind of pull from my bank, meaning my first year and a half at college was at Springfield College. And at Springfield College, if you go there for leadership, which might be exercise science, strength and conditioning coach, physical education, like they really dive into communication. They do an amazing job with that. And one of my courses was literally just on classroom management. And you only got graded on how well you can run a class and manage a class like 20 people, right? Where you stand, how you should be walking in the correct from the macro to the micro, how you need to talk, body language. Like it was awesome. And I learned so much from that. on how to run a class. So I kind of pull things from my college education and kind of try to portray them to that. Because like, listen, if you've never ran a class before, you know, there's stuff that you have to work on that you might not think about, like where you're positioned, how do you cross your arms, do you talk to someone, like do you turn off to the side, eye positioning, how to go from the outside to the inside without having your back to people, right? There's so many different intricacies, how to position people, where they should stand, you know, if something else is going on, how to alter the room so they just see you and they're not focusing on what else is going on, so their attention's on you. Like all these little nuances that they hammered into us are things that I try to kind of teach to them.
And to clarify, is that like a school context in terms of like being an educator? Is that what the class was on?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's like, okay, if you're going to be whatever, a high school teacher.
Yeah, a gym teacher. Like this is how you have, this is our
Oh, I see. Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Awesome. So it's essentially great. You have your exercise science curriculum and that's all well and good. But if you're standing in front of a group of rowdy teens, they don't care and they're going to disrespect you. Here's what you do.
Yeah. How to manage it, how to control it, how to position it. So it's the best possible teaching and learning environment.
What do you do? What did they teach you to do regarding disrespectful teens?
You know, I'm pretty stern with them from the beginning. You know, we worked with lots of we worked lots of like basketball teams and baseball kids, and I kind of set the tone from the beginning. You know, and with that tone, it's I give them rules, whether it's having shoes tied, what time to be here, look me in the eye when I talk to you, no swearing, kind of like these set rules. And I don't do it to be a tough guy, but I do let them know like I'm not messing around, like this is what we have to do. And then when I feel like people are disrespectful, I'll talk to them privately, so I try not to put them in a defensive position. And if they do it again, then I'll call them out in front of everybody and probably kick them out right away. You can't come back. And I've only had to do that once, actually. You know?
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, I think that giving feedback like that is often challenging for a lot of people in a coaching position or just a leadership position in general, is that you think you've done a good job of setting expectations, you've clearly defined the rules, et cetera, and then someone just doesn't follow them, right?
Yeah.
Either deliberately or accidentally. So what's your thought process there?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is people have to throw their egos away. So when that happens to me, like, and listen, like I'm the first one to like have an emotional kind of roller coaster. Like something happens, thankfully I'm very intrinsic. So if something happens and I feel like I'll be right, like this person's disrespecting me, like how dare they, right? And I'm automatically like inside I'm burning, you know, I'm like, all right, what's my next move? Do I punch him in the face? And then not for kids, right? But this is like other people, right? But if it comes to the kids, I'm like, where's this coming from? It's gotta be coming from somewhere, right? Because most of the time it is. And I'll pull them to the side and I'll explain, but listen, like when you did that, like that's to me, that's a sign of disrespect because of this happening, you know? And I try to kind of teach them and talk to them like a man and let them know like how that's making me feel and what I'm probably going to do because of that. Like, listen, you might not have been doing it out of disrespect, or it might have been like something that, you know, whatever, but I'm just letting you know now, please don't do that again because I'm taking it as a form of disrespect. And to me, it is a disrespect, you know? So I still try to take it from a teaching and education standpoint. I think like if you always have compassion and love, like the world needs more of that, and you can get to the bottom of a lot of things a lot better. But if they do it a second time, then I drop the fucking hammer.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
Got it. So initially you almost treat it as an education moment of like, hey, maybe you didn't realize what happens when you do this, but here's some feedback on that.
Yeah, for sure. Because they might not be, right? And there might be something else going on, or it could be like, hey, like they're super intimidated by what they're about to do and they don't know any way how to react from it, as opposed to like doing like this sort of behavior or object because they're super scared or nervous inside, right? So they're trying to come out like a tough guy. And that's just understanding different archetypes, you know? And Brett Bartholomew talks a lot about that. And he has a book, Conscious Coaching, which is great. And the more you can understand people's archetypes, the better you can have language. And the better the language you have, the better buy-in you have for everybody.
Yeah, awesome. So I want to get in the weeds just a little bit with some CrossFit coaching stuff, since I think I heard potentially another podcast you were on, or maybe something we talked about in person, just related to the difference between training CrossFit as a sport and then actually doing general physical preparedness for CrossFit as a sport, which can be a little bit tricky to find that balance, right? Because at this point, if someone is competing, they need to be able to do pretty specific amounts of volume of a lot of kind of silly movements like butterfly chest to bar pull-ups and all this stuff. But then as a coach, we also want to give people the base of support, like you mentioned previously, to be able to handle the actual volume of training that they need to do in their sport. So how do you balance that for your athletes throughout a training year?
So I always look, so if we take from the beginning, I always think about, you always have to have structural stability and stabilization within inside the joints. And that's kind of like first and foremost what I always look at. Then there's the pillars, and the pillars are like proper breathing protocols, to down regulate, up regulate, nutrition, movement, and sleep. And that is essentially ideal for any athlete to have, to really build and progress upon. Then from there, I want to think about the athletes, right? And the first thing is like, all right, well, are they strong enough? And if they're not strong enough, then I got to think, what do they need? So they need to go through a basic strength training phase if I hypertrophy the strength to power, or they just need more reps, sets, i.e. volume at a specific thing to kind of get them there, if the other stuff is already built upon there, right? So that's the next thing. Now, if they are deemed strong enough, then from there, I want to move in, and then I look at from a capacity standpoint, like how's their aerobic capacity? And when I say aerobic capacity, I'm talking about like zone 1, zone 2. Like I don't like, if they have a VO2, okay, cool. Like how high is it? What is it? What's the threshold? What's the percentage of that threshold to the VO2? But then more importantly, like what's that aerobic threshold to that anaerobic threshold? Meaning, ideally, I want that within inside 10%. So let's say if their VO2 is a 55, cool. We're probably not going to get that much higher. But their anaerobic threshold, what's the percentage of that to the VO2? All right, cool, right? That means that they can operate at a high heart rate for longer. But more importantly in the sport, what's that aerobic threshold to anaerobic threshold? And too often times we see that number is like way too low. So like, let's say their aerobic threshold is like, 30% of the anaerobic threshold. I essentially want that to be 10%. Because that means if that aerobic threshold is higher, then that's going to offset that feeling of lactate. That's going to offset that process. That means they can operate at a higher heart rate without tapping the threshold. And which also means that they're going to recover a lot faster and be a lot more resilient with inside workouts, and also leads down the path of being able to sustain a higher volume, right? So that's like the baseline of where I look at for these guys. Then when I kind of get that lined up, then it's like, all right, now we can look at dynamic contractions. Now we think about these dynamic contractions in that realm as where concurrent training isn't going to really work. Meaning, if you look at somebody, all right, I got to increase the anaerobic threshold and aerobic threshold. Well, it's not going to happen at the same time. So I'll look at phases within inside dynamic contractions. And if we're looking at just kind of building and progressing the aerobic threshold, so think zone 1, zone 2, think heart rate up to like 70%, let's call it, right? Then I'm essentially going to put everything from monostructure work to dynamic contractions inside that realm. And with inside that realm, I'm going to build volume. And I'm going to build control technique through that. I don't want anything to be hard. I'm just going to progress it. Then from there, once they establish that point, I can then segue into intensity. And I'm not going to start like guns blazing. I might start just 10% of the week. We add intensity at the low levels of anaerobic threshold. And I'm going to bring the volume down. Then I'm going to add intensity now to the dynamic contractions. And then from there, I'll add volume, right? And etc. And I go through this process with the athletes over the span of the year, or 1 year, or 2 years, or 3 years, based on that protocols. Meaning, if they're not strong enough for it, now I got to get them stronger. I'm not even worried about like threshold work and like that. I got to get these guys stronger. If they're not properly balanced with power and strength, then I got to get them more powerful, right? I got to build the numbers and build that quote unquote balance. Now we know that at a higher elite level, like there's not going to be complete balance, right? And that's okay. It depends upon the demands of the sport. But we have to start somewhere. And then from there, once we establish that, then I'll be progressing into the dynamic contractions. Now, for some athletes, it happens at different stages and different areas, and the training blocks take different times, but it's understanding the athletes and what they need.
Got it. So to sort of clarify and summarize, it sounds like one of the main priorities that you have for a lot of athletes is sort of taking them through this theoretical progression. And for a lot of folks who are somewhat competitive in the sport of CrossFit, provided they have the prerequisites to be able to do it in terms of strength and gymnastics ability, a lot of the work it sounds like is spent trying to bring their aerobic threshold up relative to their anaerobic threshold, right? Meaning that they can do more work aerobically without having to dip into as much anaerobic metabolism, which, like you said, makes the work more sustainable within a specific session and helps them recover better between sessions. Is that an accurate summary?
Yeah, absolutely. And especially more with the aging athlete. Like aging athlete, I try to delay as much of that anaerobic work as possible, right? Because you have more stuff happening with life, family, financials, marriage, kids. I need to try to minimize the cortisol in the weight room as much as I can, just so I can keep their hormones in a good place if they're not taking anything else, right? So I got to kind of really think about that even more with the aging athlete, because I need to see progression. And as we know, like too much cortisol, like that's the quickest way for regression and overtraining.
And for these thresholds, are you actually calculating these based upon heart rate? Are you having people do lactate balance point tests? Or is it just kind of based more upon the feedback from the individual of like, hey, I did all these repeats at this pace. It felt kind of hard, but I was okay, versus I blew up on my third one and had to roll on the ground.
Yeah,
afterwards.
so it's in the language. Everything's language, right? And I would love to be able to do lactate testing and blood pricks and all that stuff, but how can you do that in a training session when it's just you with like 7 guys, right? It's like you're not going to do it. So it's descriptive language. So let's say it's like a monostructural workout of assault bike intervals, right? I'm like, all right, I want you to hit 20 calories on assault bike. So the beginning part for aerobic threshold will be like, all right, we're just going to ride the bike for 40 minutes. Keep it at a pace where you can have a conversation. I want you just to be able to talk. I want you to feel like if I were to come up and ask you a question, you can answer that question without having to be out of breath. That's the intensity that you should be working at. So getting them first to understand that intensity, right? And if it's more like a dynamic contraction standpoint, let's say it's like, all right, this is for like an elite level athlete. We're going to build up. We're doing 10 rounds. You're going to do 5 ring muscle ups, 20 wall balls, assault bike for 30 cals. You're going to just follow through like that. Then my description would be, I need every round to be the exact same time. I never want you to feel out of control. I never want you to feel out of breath. I want you to stay under control, use the bike as recovery, be able to control your breathing, or I might say nasal breathe the whole time. I'm going to be very descriptive in ways that I think can affect the intensity. And if like a time round is off, like, oh man, that was hard, I'll be like, well, you did it wrong. It shouldn't have been hard, right? You should have been like the reps. I make sure that the reps and the volume and sets are completely attainable for them based off their ability and where they are. So now I just have to make sure that my descriptive of how they're going to work is going to be okay for that, right? So yeah, language.
Yeah, so a lot of it is essentially giving that athlete a pretty clear direction in terms of what the training should feel like.
Correct.
And I'm mindful of your time since you got to jump off right about now. So let's give people some information on Conquer Athlete, on CrossFit Milford, on the relatively new Conquer Athlete podcast. What's up?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I'd love to get on this more. I feel like we were kind of like just tapping into some major questions.
I know we could have kept digging on that.
I know. So if you want, I'd love to get back on with you whenever you want. But
yeah, let's do it.
Cool. But yeah, so we have conquerathlete.com. That's where if you want to get like programming, education, our podcasts on there, the Conquer Athlete podcast, all of our kind of major like online information is there for programming, education, coaching, mentorship, seminars. And that CrossFit Milford is a gym where we run like mostly just the gym classes. CrossFitMilford.com. That's in Milford, Connecticut. If you want to follow me on Instagram, I'll put a lot of stuff on there. Conquer Athlete on Instagram, or just Jason Leydon.
Thanks for listening all the way through. I admire your grit, your persistence, and your perseverance. Since you made it, I have a few favors to ask of you. Go ahead and open up the show notes on whatever podcast player you use. In there, you'll find links to all the resources that were mentioned throughout the show. There's also some links there in which you can leave a review or subscribe to the show. And podcasters are always harping on this because this actually makes a difference in terms of the algorithms that recommend podcasts to new people. So if you do that, it helps more people find the show. And if you head over to toddneef.com, you can sign up to receive most of my thoughts and writing, which really only go out to the email list. A lot of it never makes it to the blog or the podcast. So if you like what I have to say and you want to see some of my recommendations and stuff that I've been checking out, go ahead and subscribe to that email newsletter as well.